Some of these essays in sociology are like the analysis of totemism, persuasive and enlightening as far as they go, inasmuch as any metaphysical content or affective aura these beliefs may have is vigorously excluded from attention. This is not really so very far. Others like the attempt to show that totemism and caste are capable, by means of a very simple transformation, of being reduced to variant expressions of the same general underlying structure, are at least intriguing, if not precisely convincing. And others like the attempts to show that the different ways in which horses, dogs, birds, and cattle are named form a coherent three-dimensional system of complementary images cross-cut by relations of inverted symmetry, are triumphs of self-parody. They are exercised in depth interpretation, far-fetched enough to make even a psychoanalyst blush. It is all terribly ingenious. If a model of society which is eternal and universal can be built up out of the debris of dead and dying societies, a model which reflects neither time nor place nor circumstance, but this from totemism, a direct expression of the structure of the mind, and behind the mind, probably of the brain, then this may well be the way to build it. 3. For what Levi-Strauss has made for himself is an infernal culture machine. It annuls history, reduces sentiment to a shadow of the intellect, and replaces the particular minds of particular savages in particular jungles with the savage mind immanent in us all. It has made it possible for him to circumvent the impasse to which his Brazilian expedition led physical closeness and intellectual distance, by what perhaps he always really wanted, intellectual closeness and physical distance. I stood out against the new tendencies in metaphysical thinking, which were then, in 1934, beginning to take shape. He wrote in Tristes Tropics, explaining his dissatisfaction with academic philosophy and his turn toward anthropology. Phenomenology I found unacceptable, insofar as it postulated a continuity between experience and reality, that one enveloped and explained the other. I was quite willing to agree, but I had learned that there is no continuity in the passage between the two, and that to reach reality we must first repudiate experience, even though we may later reintegrate it into an objective synthesis in which sentimentality plays no part. As for the trend of thought which was to find fulfillment in existentialism, it seemed to me to be the exact opposite of true thought, by reason of its indulgent attitude toward the illusions of subjectivity, to promote private preoccupations to the rank of philosophical problems is dangerous, excusable and as an element in teaching procedure, but perilous in the extreme if it leads the philosopher to turn his back on his mission. That mission he holds in he holds it only until science is strong enough to take over from philosophy, is to understand being in relation to itself and not in relation to oneself. The high science of La Pensée Sauvage and the heroic quest of Triste Tropics are at base but very simple transformations of one another. They are variant expressions of the same deep underlying structure, the universal rationalism of the French Enlightenment. For all the apostrophes to structural linguistics, information theory, class logic, cybernetics, game theory, and other advanced doctrines. It is not the Saussure, or Shannon, or Boodle, or Weiner, or von Neumann who is Lévi-Strauss' real guru, nor despite the ritual invocation of them for dramatic effects, Marx or Buddha, but Rousseau. Rousseau is our master and our brother. Rousseau is our master and our brother, for there is only one way in which we can escape the contradictions inherent in the notion of the position of the anthropologist, and that is by reformulating on our own account the intellectual procedures which allow Rousseau to move forward from the ruins left by the Discours sur l'origine de l'inégalité to the ample design of the social contract, of which Emile reveals the secret. He it is who showed us how, after we have destroyed every existing order, we can still discover the principle which allow us to erect a new order in their stead. Like Rousseau, Lévi-Strauss' search is not after all for man, whom he doesn't much care for, but for man. For man, with whom he is enthralled. It is as much in La Pensée Sauvage as in Triste Tropics. The jewel in the lotus he is after. The unshakable basis of human society is not really social at all, but psychological, a rational, universal, eternal, and thus, in the great tradition of French moralism, virtuous mind. Rousseau, of all the philosophers, the nearest to being an anthropologist, demonstrates the method by which the paradox of the anthropological traveler, who comes either too late to find savagery or too early to appreciate it, can at last be solved. We must, as he did, develop the ability to penetrate the savage mind by employing to provide Lévi-Strauss with what he perhaps least needs, another expression, what might be called epistemological empathy, the bridge between our world and that of our subjects, extinct, opaque, or merely tethered, lies not in personal confrontation, which, so far as it occurs, corrupts both them and us. It lies in a kind of experimental mind reading, and Rousseau trying on himself modes of thought taken from elsewhere or merely imagined, in order to demonstrate that every human mind is a locus of virtual experience, where what goes on in the minds of men, however remote they may be, can be investigated. Was the first to undertake it. One understands the thought of savage neither by mere introspection nor by mere observation, but by attempting to think as they think, and with their materials. What one does, aside from obsessively detailed ethnography, is a Neolithic intelligence. The philosophical conclusions which from Levi-Strauss follow from this postulate that savages can only be understood by reenacting their thought processes with the debris of their cultures add up it in turn to a technically reconditioned version of Russian moralism. Savage, wild, undomesticated modes of thought are primary in human mentality. They are what we all have in common. The civilized, tamed, domesticated thought patterns of modern science and scholarship are specialized productions of our own society. They are secondary, derived, and though not unuseful, artificial. Although these primary modes of thought, and thus the foundations of human social life, are undomesticated, like the wild pansy, that spectacularly untranslatable pun which gives La Pensée Sauvage its title, they are essentiality intellectual, rational, logical, not emotional, instinctive, or mystical. The best, but in no sense perfect, time for man was the Neolithic, i.e. post-agricultural, pre-urban age. That Rousseau, who, contrary to the usual stereotype of him, was not a primitivism, called Société Naissance, for it was then that this mentality flourished, producing out of its science of the concrete those arts of civilization: agriculture, animal husbandry, pottery, weaving, food conservation and preparation, and so on, which still provide the foundations of our existence. It would have been better for man. It would have been better for man had he kept to this middle ground between the indolence of the primitive state and the questing activity to which we are prompted by our armor probe. Instead of abandoning it by some unhappy chance for the restless ambitiousness, the pride and egoism of mechanical civilization. But he has left it. The task of social reform consists in turning us toward that middle state, not by drowning us back into the Neolithic, but by presenting us with compelling reminders of its human achievements, its sociological grace, so as to draw us forward into a rational future where its ideals, the balancing of self-regard with general sympathy, will be even more fully realized, and it is a scientifically enriched anthropology legitimizing the principles of savage thought and restoring them to their rightful place, which is the appropriate agency of such reform. Progress toward humanness, that gradual unfolding of the higher intellectual faculties Rousseau called perfectibilité, was destroyed by cultural parochialism armed with a half-grown science. Cultural universalism armed with a mature science will once more set it in motion. If the human race has so far concentrated on one task, and one alone, that of building a society in which men can live, then the sources of strength on which our remote ancestors drew are present also in ourselves. All the stakes are still on the board, and we can take them up at any time we please. Whatever has done and done badly can be begun all over again. The Golden Age, wrote Rousseau, which blind superstition situated behind or ahead of us is in us. Human brotherhood acquires a palpable significance when we find our image of it confirmed in the poorest of tribes, and when that tribe offers us an experience which, when joined with many hundreds of others, has a lesson to teach us. Fourth, but perhaps more interesting, that this modernized profession of a classical faith in, to use Hooker's phrase, the perpetual and general voice of man, is what the fate of such attempt to set King Reason back upon his throne in the guise of the cerebral savage will be in today's world. However much it is set round with symbolic logic, matrix algebra, or structural linguistics, can we, after all that has happened since 1762, still believe in the sovereignty of the intellect? After a century and a half of investigations into the depths of human consciousness, which have uncovered vested interests, infantile emotions, or a chaos of animal appetites, we now have one which finds there the pure light of natural wisdom that shines in all alike. It will doubtless be greeted in some quarters with a degree of welcome, not to say relief. Yet that such an investigation should have been launched from an anthropological base seems distinctly surprising, for anthropologists are forever being tempted, as Levi-Strauss himself once was, out of libraries and lecture halls, where it is hard to remember that the mind of man is not dry light, into the field where it is impossible to forget it, even if there are not many true savages out there anymore. There are enough vividly peculiar human individuals around to make any doctrine of man which seems him as the bearer of changeless truths of reason, an original logic proceeding from the structure of the mind, seems merely quaint and academic curiosity. The Levi-Strauss should have been able to transmute the romantic passion of Tristis Tropics into the hyper-modern intellectualism of La Pince Sauvage is surely a startling achievement. But there remains the question one cannot help but ask. Is the transmutation science or alchemy? Is the very simple transformation which produces a general theory out of a personal disappointment real, or a sleight of hand? It is a genuine demolition of the wall which seems to separate mind from mind by showing that the walls are surface structures only. Or is this an elaborately disguised evasion necessitated by a failure to bridge them when they were directly encountered? Is Levi-Strauss writing, as he seems to be claiming in the confident pages of La Pensée Sauvage, a prolegomenon of all future anthropology? Or is he, like some unprooted Neolithic intelligent cast away on a reservation, shuffling the debris of old traditions in vain attempt to revivify a primitive faith whose moral beauty is still apparent, but from which both relevance and credibility have long since departed?